Terry Reid, the influential and enigmatic English rock singer, guitarist, and songwriter whose voice soared across decades yet whose name remained a whisper among giants, has passed away at the age of 75. As reported by The Guardian, representatives confirmed the news of his death. No official cause has been disclosed, but it is known that Reid had been undergoing cancer treatment in the past year. His passing marks the end of a truly unique musical journey, one not defined by the typical rise to fame, but instead by a legacy interwoven with the foundations of rock history itself. Born Terence James Reid in the serene English village of Bluntisham, Cambridgeshire, in 1949, Reid's early life was steeped in the rustic charm and cultural quietude of post-war Britain. From a young age, he displayed an affinity for music that went far beyond simple teenage curiosity. His natural inclination for melody, rhythm, and vocal expression was evident early on, and it wasn't long before he began to draw attention in local circles. By the time he was a teenager, Reid had already begun making his mark. In 1965, still a young man barely out of school, he joined the instrumental band Peter J. and the Jaywalkers as a guitarist. The experience gave him his first taste of professional musicianship and stage presence, and although the Jaywalkers were not destined for long-term success, their moment in the spotlight was significant. In fact, the group had the rare opportunity to open for the Rolling Stones on tour, a prestigious gig that offered the teenage Reid a front-row seat to the chaos and charisma of rock and roll's rapidly evolving global movement. Despite this incredible opportunity, Peter J. and the Jaywalkers disbanded shortly afterward. Rather than retreat, Reid pushed forward. His raw talent, particularly his voice, one that could glide from a smoky whisper to a bluesy roar in the span of a verse, set him apart in an era teeming with vocal innovation. He launched his solo career with the release of his debut album Bang Bang, You're Terry Reid in 1968. The record was a stunning mix of psychedelic rock, blues, and soulful balladry, a perfect capsule of the turbulent yet artistically explosive period. Critics praised the album, and it helped cement Reid's reputation as a rising star. Yet, commercial success remained elusive. Reid had all the ingredients for stardom: looks, charisma, skill, a one-in-a-million voice, but fate had other plans. That same year, he embarked on a U.S. tour as the opening act for Cream. It was a formative experience for him, placing him directly in front of massive American audiences and giving him exposure few young British artists could dream of. During this period, one of Reid's earliest compositions, A Man with No Expression, gained unexpected traction. Written when he was just 14, the song was a marvel of youthful insight and emotional depth. It was later recorded by the Hollies and would go on to be reinterpreted under various titles by legendary acts including Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, REO Speedwagon, and John Mellencamp. For a song birthed in the mind of a teenage boy from Cambridgeshire, it made an extraordinary journey, much like Reid himself. Despite not having major chart-topping hits of his own, Reid's influence ran deep within the corridors of rock royalty. He was what many would later call a musician's musician, beloved by his peers, respected by producers, and envied by vocalists for his extraordinary range. One of the most defining moments of his career, and indeed, one of the most talked about what-ifs in rock history, came when Jimmy Page was putting together a new band after the disbandment of the Yardbirds. Page approached Reid and offered him the role of lead vocalist for the band that would eventually become Led Zeppelin. It was a moment that could have changed the trajectory of his life forever. Reid, however, was already booked to open for the Rolling Stones on an American tour. Bound by his commitment and loyal to the opportunity at hand, he turned Page down, but not without offering a suggestion. He recommended a relatively unknown singer named Robert Plant. The rest, of course, became rock history. This single act of turning down the lead vocalist role for what would become one of the most iconic bands in the world has followed Reid throughout his life. It's a story told in hushed awe, with fans and musicians alike wondering what might have been. But this wasn't the only monumental opportunity Reid walked away from. He later declined an offer from Ritchie Blackmore to replace Rod Evans as the lead singer of Deep Purple. Again, Reid was not chasing stardom in the conventional sense. His decisions weren't driven by ego or fear, they were choices rooted in integrity, artistic direction, and an unwavering sense of self. His voice earned him the nickname of Superlungs, and it was a fitting moniker. Reid's singing was nothing short of visceral. It moved listeners not just emotionally, but physically, with a rawness that seemed to bypass intellect and go straight for the soul. Aretha Franklin was a fan. So were the Rolling Stones. Even as mainstream fame eluded him, Reid was always a revered presence in the music world. In the 1970s, his career continued steadily, though not without challenges. The industry was changing rapidly, and Reid's style, rooted in blues, soul, and heartfelt storytelling, was often at odds with the emerging trends. Yet he never compromised. He toured extensively, sometimes headlining and sometimes supporting, always leaving an impression on those lucky enough to witness him live. Reid's life was also marked by remarkable friendships and collaborations. When Brazilian musician and cultural icon Gilberto Gil was forced into exile during Brazil's military dictatorship, he found refuge in London. Reid offered him a place to stay, a gesture that spoke volumes about his character. Gil's time in Reid's home is a lesser-known but profoundly touching chapter in the singer's life, two musical minds from vastly different worlds finding common ground in creativity and humanity. By the late 70s, Reid had pulled back from the spotlight. The pressures of fame, the volatile nature of the music industry, and perhaps a desire to reclaim a sense of normalcy led him to step away from his solo career. However, he never truly left music behind. Instead, he became a sought-after session musician, lending his talent to records by Bonnie Raitt, Jackson Browne, and Don Henley. His presence on these albums may have been subtle, but it added an unmistakable texture that only he could provide. In 1991, after years away from center stage, Reid returned with The Driver, an album produced by Trevor Horn. It marked a significant comeback for the singer, introducing his voice to a new generation. The record was a blend of maturity and the timeless fire that had always burned in his vocals. Around the same time, Reid's cover of the Spencer Davis Group's "Gimme Some Lovin'" was featured in the film Days of Thunder, exposing his music to a much wider and more mainstream audience than ever before. It was a brief brush with the mass appeal that had eluded him for so long, but it never altered his course. Reid remained true to who he was, an artist first, always. The years that followed saw Reid continuing to perform live, particularly in the United States, where he had long maintained a cult following. His shows were often intimate affairs, more akin to storytelling sessions than rock concerts. Audiences didn't come for spectacle, they came for authenticity. His voice, though aged, retained its unmistakable grit and emotion. He sang like a man who had lived 1,000 lives, and in many ways, he had. Those who heard him perform in the later years often spoke of the experience with a kind of reverence, as if they'd witnessed something fleeting and sacred. Terry Reid's story is not one of conventional stardom. He wasn't a household name, he didn't dominate the charts, and he wasn't splashed across magazine covers. But he lived a life in music that was deeply rich, emotionally sincere, and marked by artistic integrity. His name might not have been in bold print, but it was written in the margins of nearly every major chapter in rock and roll history. He was the voice that echoed through the choices of others, the unsung hero who nudged destiny forward with quiet confidence. Those who knew Reid personally often described him as deeply passionate, humble to a fault, and fiercely loyal. He was a man who believed in the purity of music, not as a commodity, but as a craft. He championed honesty in art, and that ethos informed every note he sang and every chord he played. In many ways, his career choices reflect a kind of bravery that is rare, the courage to say no to fame when it means saying yes to oneself.